The line graph illustrates the price changes for 800 grams of 4 different types of bread: whole grain, brown, white, and rye in a European country between 2001 and 2005. Prices are measured in euros. In general, prices for all bread types except whole grain increased over the period. Although whole grain bread was initially the most expensive, brown bread eventually became the priciest. Rye bread consistently remained the least expensive option throughout. In 2001, whole grain bread was priced at 0.8 euros, rising sharply to 1.8 euros in 2002. However, its price then dropped dramatically to 0.7 euros in 2004 before returning to 0.8 euros in 2005, the same as at the start. Meanwhile, rye, white, and brown bread all cost 0.6 euros in 2001. By 2005, the price of white bread had more than doubled to 1.3 euros. Brown bread experienced a rapid increase to 1.5 euros in 2002, followed by some fluctuations, eventually becoming the most expensive at 1.6 euros in 2005. Rye bread's price was relatively stable, fluctuating slightly between 0.5 and 0.7 euros and remaining the cheapest throughout the 5 years. The pie charts illustrate the proportion of students enrolled in different courses at an adult education center in 1985 and in the present year. Overview: overall, there is a clear shift toward technology-related courses, with the addition of IT as a new subject accounting for the largest share of students. Meanwhile, courses such as music appreciation and local history have been removed, while fitness and dance participation has remained consistent, and cookery has seen a moderate increase. Body paragraph 1: in 1985, modern languages was the most popular, with 24% of students taking these courses, followed closely by fitness and dance at 22%. Another similarity can be seen in the participation in art, local history, and cookery courses, ranging from 14% to 17%. Lastly, music appreciation attracted the smallest share of students, making up just 8% of the total enrollment. Body paragraph 2: in the current year, IT has replaced modern languages as the course with the most enrollments, with a figure of 27%. Modern languages, in turn, have seen a decrease, now representing 17%. Fitness and dance have retained the same proportion of students, while cookery has increased to 19%. Art, on the other hand, has slightly dropped to 15%. Notably, music appreciation and local history are no longer part of the curriculum. Body paragraph 3: the pie charts illustrate the proportion of students enrolled in different courses at an adult education center in 1985 and in the present year. The table illustrates the numbers of international visitors to 5 different areas from 1990 to 2005. As can be observed from the table, the figures for international travelers experienced upward trends throughout the period, and Europe proved to be the most popular destination for travelers around the world. Regarding the 3 most favored destinations in 1990, with 280.2 million visitors, international travelers to Europe outnumbered those to America, Asia, and the Pacific: 80.5 million and 60.2 million visitors, respectively. 15 years later, the figure for international visitors to Europe witnessed considerable increases and ended up at 400.2 million visitors, which made this area still head the list. Despite being ranked 3rd on the list in 1990, the number of visitors to Asia and the Pacific surpassed the 113.2 million visitors to America and gradually rose to 135.8 million in 2005 to be the second most popular destination. Turning to the other destinations, there were 18.2 million visitors in Africa, nearly twice as many as the number of travelers in the Middle East: 9.8 million visitors. Then, the figures for people traveling to Africa and the Middle East steadily went up and ended at 28.7 and 15.8 million visitors in turn. The bar chart compares the percentage of males in a certain country who prefer watching sports with those who enjoy participating in them across 6 different sporting activities. Overall, it is clear that team sports such as football, basketball, and rugby are more popular to watch, while individual sports like fishing and badminton attract more participants. Football had the highest viewing preference, whereas fishing was the most popular sport to take part in. In terms of watching sports, football topped the list with around 40% of males choosing to watch it, followed closely by basketball at approximately 36%. Rugby and horse riding also had higher viewing rates than participation, standing at about 28% and 35% respectively. Notably, the gap between watching and participating in football and horse-related sports was significant, with roughly double the number of watchers compared to players. Conversely, fishing stood out as the most popular sport for participation, with 50% of males involved in it, while only about 12% preferred watching it. Badminton had a relatively balanced distribution, with participation just under 30%, slightly exceeding viewing rates roughly 27%. Rugby was the only team sport where the proportion of participants 20% remained notably lower than viewers. The two bar charts compare the employment rates of males and females in the UK in 2008 based on their age group and the age of their youngest child. Overall, men had higher employment rates than women across all age categories. Furthermore, the likelihood of being employed among women increased with the age of their youngest child, while for men, employment rates remained consistently high regardless of parental responsibilities. In terms of age group, both males and females aged 35 to 49 had the highest employment rates, at around 85% and slightly above 80% respectively. Employment was also relatively high for those aged 26 to 34 and 50 to 59, with male rates ranging from 70% to 80%, compared to approximately 60–75% for female. Conversely, the youngest age group 16–25 and the oldest 60+ had the lowest levels of employment, with both genders recording less than 40%. Turning to the second chart, there is a noticeable trend for women. The older their youngest child, the more likely they were to be employed. Only around 60% of women with children aged 0 to 5 had jobs, while this figure rose steadily to around 75% among those whose youngest child was in the 21–25 age group. In contrast, male employment levels remained stable at around 70–75% regardless of child age. The two pie charts illustrate the proportion of energy produced from 6 different resources in a particular country over an 18-year period, from 1985 to 2003. Overall, it is clear that oil remained the primary source of energy in both years, although its dominance decreased significantly. The period saw a notable shift away from fossil fuels like oil and coal towards alternative sources, most notably natural gas and hydropower. In 1985, oil was by far the largest contributor, accounting for over half of all energy production at 52%. This was followed by coal and natural gas, which made up 22% and 13% respectively. Hydro energy represented 8% of the total, while nuclear and other renewables contributed the least at 4% and 1% of the total energy supply. By 2003, the distribution of energy production had changed dramatically. The proportion of oil fell to just 39%, while coal saw an even more dramatic decline, dropping by more than half to only 8% of the total. In contrast, natural gas and hydropower experienced significant growth. The figure for natural gas nearly doubled, rising to 23%, and hydropower's share almost tripled to 22%. Meanwhile, the percentage of nuclear energy remained constant at 4%, and other renewables saw a modest increase to 4%, matching the figure for nuclear energy. The table compares the percentage of first-year students in 3 different college courses who rated 5 types of resources as very good. The evaluated aspects include pre-course information, teaching, tutor support, printed resources, and other resources. Overall, the commerce course received the highest satisfaction levels in nearly all categories, while the law course showed the least favorable ratings in several aspects. Notably, there were substantial variations in ratings for the quality of teaching across the 3 courses. In terms of pre-course information, commerce students gave the most positive feedback 95%, followed by law 72% and economics 59%. Similarly, for teaching, both economics and commerce recorded an identical high score of 95%, whereas law significantly lagged behind at just 62%. Tutor support was also most appreciated by commerce students 93%, with economics at 90% and law again trailing at 76%. Regarding printed resources, the highest percentage of satisfaction was again seen in commerce 85%, compared to 81% in economics and only 70% in law. For other resources, commerce and law had nearly identical ratings 81% and 80%, respectively, while economics received a considerably lower score of 60%. The maps illustrate how a small museum and its surrounding area changed between 1990 and 2010. Overall, the the museum underwent a series of transformations over the 20-year period, including the removal of the cottage and garden, the addition of a cafe, and the expansion of the car park. However, some features such as the exhibition room, restaurant, and shop remain unchanged. In 1990, the exhibition room occupied a central position near the entrance, and it was surrounded by a restaurant to the northwest and a shop to the south. Cottage was located in the southwest corner of the map, bordered by a garden that extended toward the southeast. A car park was situated on the eastern side of the museum, accessible via a curved road from the main row. By 2010, the cottage and the garden to the south had been replaced by a new cafe, offering visitors more recreational space. The entrance remained in the same position, but appeared to be more directly connected to the exhibition area. Meanwhile, the car park had been significantly expanded to cover the area formerly occupied by the Eastern G. The two plans depict the layout of a small theater in 2010 and 2012. The changes between the 2 years are significant, with notable additions to the backstage area and a reorganization of some public spaces. Overall, the theater underwent several key modifications, including the addition of a corridor and a restaurant, as well as the installation of showers. The main auditorium and stage remain in their original locations, but the spaces for administrative and ticketing offices, as well as the cafe, were rearranged. In 2010, the theater had a simple layout with the main auditorium centrally positioned, surrounded by a dressing room, administrative office, ticket office, and a cafe. The seating arrangement in the auditorium was unchanged, but the cafe was located at the bottom left of the plan. The dressing room and stage were situated at the top, with the administrative and ticket offices in the bottom right corner. By 2012, the design had changed quite a bit. A new corridor was introduced along the top of the plan, providing easier access to the dressing room and stage. The cafe and ticket office were relocated to the lower right, while a new restaurant was added to the bottom left of the plan, replacing the cafe's previous position. Additionally, showers were installed behind the stage area to the right of the dressing room. These changes improved the functionality of the theater, enhancing both backstage and public access areas. The line graph illustrates the proportion of people who expressed satisfaction with the healthcare system in 4 countries: Canada, the UK, the Netherlands, and the US over the period from 1991 to 2007. Overall, the Netherlands consistently had the highest satisfaction levels and remained stable throughout the period. In contrast, the US reported the lowest satisfaction rates across all 3 years. While Canada experienced a notable fluctuation, the UK witnessed a gradual increase in public satisfaction. In 1991, Canada led the chart with approximately 60% of its population satisfied with the healthcare system, followed by the Netherlands at just under 50%. The UK had a relatively modest level of satisfaction at 22%, while the US had the lowest, with only 10%. By 1998, satisfaction in Canada dropped significantly to around 20%, placing it on par with the UK, which had seen a slight rise. Meanwhile, the Netherlands remained steady at just below 50%, and the US showed a marginal increase to about 11%. In 2007, Canada saw a recovery, with satisfaction levels climbing back up to 40%, and the UK continued its upward trend, reaching roughly 28%. The Netherlands showed minimal change and remained the most positively rated, while the US, despite a slight improvement to 13%, continued to rank lowest among the 4 nations. The table presents data on the percentage of tax collected as a proportion of GDP in 5 countries for 4 years between 1975 and 2005. Overall, Sweden consistently had the highest tax rates, with a sharp increase by 2005. In contrast, the tax rates in other countries, such as the USA, Japan, Korea, and Turkey, showed considerable changes over time, with Japan and Turkey experiencing significant increases in their tax rates by 2005. In 1975, Sweden had the highest tax collection rate at 46%, followed by the USA at 25.1%, and Japan, Korea, and Turkey, all around 15%. Over the next 30 years, Sweden saw a significant rise, reaching 70.1% in 2005. In comparison, the USA's tax rate remained relatively stable, fluctuating between 25.1% in 1975 and 27.4% in 2005, indicating a modest increase. Regarding other countries, Japan had the largest increase, with its tax rate growing from 15% in 1975 to 32.1% by 2005. Similarly, Turkey's tax rate rose from 16.4% in 1975 to 27.4% in 2005. Korea also experienced a steady increase in tax collection, rising from 15.1% to 27.3% during the period in question. In conclusion, Sweden's tax rates were the highest, and the country experienced the most substantial increase over the period. In contrast, the USA maintained relatively stable tax rates, while Japan, Korea, and Turkey saw noticeable increases in their tax collection percentages by 2005. The charts illustrate the percentage of men and women who held driving licenses in one European country between 1976 and 2006, as well as the percentage of young drivers aged 17, 20 in 1996 and 2006. Overall, it is clear that men consistently had a higher percentage of driving licenses than women over the years. Both men and women experienced steady increases in the proportion of licensed drivers, with the gap between the two groups narrowing significantly by 2006. In 1976, 70% of men possessed a driving license, compared to just 30% of women. This gap narrowed slightly over the following years, with 75% of men and 40% of women holding a driving license in 1981. The gap continued to shrink in the next decades, and by 2006, 80% of men and 53% of women had driving licenses, showing an overall upward trend for both genders. When examining the percentage of young drivers aged 17, 20 in 1996 and 2006, a noticeable difference between men and women is evident. In 1996, 50% of young men had a driving license, while only 20% of young women held one. By 2006, the percentage of young male drivers increased to around 60%, while the proportion of young female drivers remained relatively low at just 25%. In conclusion, while both men and women saw increases in their driving license ownership over the period, men consistently outnumbered women in both the general population and among. The line graph displays the number of American, British, and Australian students who attended universities abroad between 2002 and 2007. Apparently, the highest number of students studying overseas belonged to the US, with the UK following in second place and Australia third. In addition, the patterns for these three countries were completely different: a noticeable decrease for the UK, slight fluctuation for the US, and consistency for Australia. The US led in the number of students traveling abroad for university education. In 2002, there were 50,000 of them, and then a slight drop in 2004 brought this number down to about 47,000 students. Immediately afterwards, it rose again and reached 50,000 in 2007. Between 2002 and 2003, the UK sent 30,000 students overseas for higher education. Despite a significant fall of almost 10,000 in the next 4 years, the UK still remained in the second rank among the three known nations. It is notable that Australia had the lowest and most stable number 10,000 of university students pursuing their studies in foreign countries over the period. The bar chart illustrates the total number of school trips made by children aged 5 to 12 in a certain country, using 5 different methods of transport, in 1990 and 2010. The data is presented in millions of trips per year. Overall, it is clear that while walking was the most prevalent mode of transport in 1990, car passenger trips had become the dominant choice by 2010. A significant trend to note is the substantial increase in the number of children traveling as car passengers, in contrast to a marked decline across all other modes of transport over the 20-year period. In 1990, walking was by far the most popular option for children going to school, accounting for just over 12 million trips. This was followed by bus travel, which stood at approximately 7 million trips. Cycling and the combination of walking and bus were less common, both accounting for around 6 million trips annually. In stark contrast, being a car passenger was the least popular method, with only about 4 million trips recorded. By 2010, the trend had completely reversed. The number of trips by car passengers surged dramatically, reaching just over 11 million and making it the most preferred choice. Conversely, walking saw a substantial decline, dropping by more than half to around 6 million trips, and it was no longer the primary method of transport. Similarly, the number of trips by bus decreased to just over 5 million, and both cycling and the walking and bus combination also The line graph illustrates the changes in the birth and death rates in New Zealand from 1901 to 2101. Overall, the birth rate in New Zealand fluctuated significantly during this period, peaking around 1960 before sharply declining. Meanwhile, the death rate showed a steady decline after a period of stability in the 20th century and is expected to continue decreasing in the future. In terms of the birth rate, it experienced a significant rise from 1901 to 1940, reaching a peak of about 60,000 births per year in the 1960s. After this peak, the birth rate began to fall sharply, dipping below 30,000 in the late 1990s. Is forecasted to remain at this low level, with only a modest rise projected toward the end of the century, before stabilizing in the 21st century. As for the death rate, it remained relatively stable at around 20,000 deaths per year from 1901 to the late 1940s. Following this, it began to decrease slowly, dropping to approximately 15,000 by the early 2000s. This downward trend is expected to continue, with the death rate forecasted to reach 10,000 per year by 2101. In conclusion, while the birth rate saw considerable fluctuations, the death rate showed a consistent decline. The future projections suggest that both rates will remain stable, with the death rate continuing its downward trend. The three illustrations depict the location of a volcano and the transformations of a village before and after a volcanic eruption. Overall, significant damage occurred to the landscape and the village infrastructure due to the eruption. Key changes include the destruction of land near the volcano, the emergence of lava flows, and the disappearance of certain natural and man-made features. Before the eruption, the volcano was situated on the western side of the area, with a village comprising multiple huts and palm trees scattered across the land. The village also featured two large lakes near its center, providing natural resources for the inhabitants. Environment appeared lush and orderly, with no signs of disturbance. After the eruption, lava flows stretched from the volcano down to the nearby areas, damaging the surrounding terrain. Parts of the village near the volcano were completely destroyed, and the lakes appeared to have been partially dried up or altered. Furthermore, many palm trees and huts were either removed or displaced, leaving some sections of the land barren and scorched. Despite these drastic changes, certain portions of the village remained intact, particularly those located farther away from the volcano. The bar chart illustrates the average weekly expenditure of families in a particular country on 8 different categories in the years 1968 and 2018. Overall, it is evident that the proportional spending on essential items like food decreased significantly, while the expenditure on leisure and housing saw a substantial rise. The other categories experienced relatively minor changes over the 50-year period. In 1968, the largest proportion of family income was dedicated to food, accounting for 35% of the total weekly budget. By 2018, this figure had fallen dramatically to just under 15%. In contrast, spending on leisure grew the most, rising from approximately 9% to around 22% and becoming the largest expenditure category in 2018. Similarly, expenditure on housing more than doubled, increasing from 10% to 18%, and spending on transport saw a significant rise from 8% to 14%. Regarding the remaining categories, the change was far less pronounced. The spending on household goods and personal goods remained relatively stable, with minor fluctuations. The percentages for clothing and footwear and fuel and power also showed little change, hovering between 6% and 8% in both years. The pie charts illustrate the percentage distribution of 5 different types of books sold by a bookseller in 1972, 1992, and 2012. The book categories include adult fiction, children's fiction, biography, travel, and others. Overall, the most notable trend is the significant increase in the sales of adult fiction from 1972 to 2012, while the popularity of other categories like travel and biography diminished over time. Children's fiction remained fairly stable during the period, with only a slight fluctuation in its share of sales. In 1972, the largest share of book sales was travel and adult fiction, each accounting for 25%. This was followed by children's fiction and biography, both making up 20%, while others occupied the smallest share at 15%. By 1992, the proportion of adult fiction had slightly increased to 25%, while children's fiction sales also saw a slight rise to 22%. Travel and biography both saw a reduction, with travel decreasing to 18% and biography to 15%. By 2012, the sales of adult fiction had surged significantly, accounting for 45% of total sales, making it by far the most popular category. Children's fiction also increased to 25%, while the share of travel books dropped further to just 10%. Similarly, biography sales fell to 8%, and the category of others declined to 12%.